Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Robert Conrad, Cleveland State University, the Chautauqua Institution, the Cleveland Clinic, and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland, Incorporated.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I am Gina Abercrombie Winstanley, and I'm a proud City Club member. I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, the 15th president of Oberlin College, Carmen Twillie Ambar. Carmen Twillie Ambar is the second woman to lead Oberlin College and the first president of African ancestry in the institution's 184-year history. She was appointed to the post in May 2017 after serving for 9 years as president of Cedar Crest College in Allentown, Pennsylvania. To be sure, her presidency is historic, echoing the traditions of the institution. In 1835, Oberlin College became the first college in America to implement a policy of admitting qualified male students regardless of their race. 2 years after that, the college began admitting women, the first institution of higher learning in the United States to do so. The college was a leader then, and President Carmen Twillie Ambar is an heir to that legacy. Early on at Oberlin, President Ambar began exploring the best ways to forge connections between the student body and the greater Cleveland community. Those early efforts bore fruit in August when the entire class of 2022 spent a day engaged in service learning throughout Cleveland. In typical Oberlin fashion, the entire excursion was carbon neutral, thanks to a group of alumni who purchased carbon offsets for the bus ride. President Ambar takes over Oberlin's helm at a challenging time when support for higher education appears to be waning. Increased cost, ballooning student loan debt, and too often low starting salaries for graduates have caused many Americans to consider alternatives to the traditional college pathway. Furthermore, recent research out of Gallup and the Pew Research Center indicate that public support for a liberal arts education, once valued for its focus on critical thinking, collaboration, and effective communication, is also eroding. Today, we'll hear how President Ambar plans to position Oberlin College, the oldest co-educational liberal arts college in the country, for the future. Prior to Cedar Crest, President Ambar had a successful tenure as vice president and dean of Douglas College at Rutgers University, where she was the youngest dean in the university's history. Before Rutgers, she was Assistant Dean of Graduate Education at the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton University. As an attorney, she worked in the New York City Law Department as an Assistant Corporation Counsel. Ladies and gentlemen, members and friends of the City Club, please join me in welcoming to the stage the president of Oberlin College, Carmen Twillie Ambar.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you. Well, I don't take this opportunity lightly. I got a chance to meet with Dan. We talked about it maybe a year ago, and he walked me through the history of the City Club and the speakers that have been before this group. And so I don't put myself in that category, but I certainly am happy to be a part of the history of this institution. And I wrote, one of the things that Dan said to me is that people write little notes that come to speak at the City Club. And what I wrote in my note, Dan, is that institutions are important if they are change agents and thought leaders and help communities think differently about themselves. And so we thank the City Club for doing that for the Cleveland area and for the greater Northeast Ohio, because we need institutions to do that. So we have 30 minutes together, right? So we have only 30 minutes together, so I'm going to try to do this as quickly as I can and get to your questions. So just remember what the topic is today. The topic is disruption, right? And so sometimes when I get finished with this talk, people say, well, you didn't talk about the conservatory, you didn't talk about new curricular issues, you didn't talk about free speech on campus, and so they walk through all the issues that you didn't talk about. And I'm happy to talk about that in the question and answer period, but this is the discussion about the disruption, right? So that's what we're discussing today. But what I thought I would do before we do that is to tell you a little bit about myself so you can know why I believe the things I believe, right? So I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas. I was born and raised in Little Rock. I have just incredible parents, just fantastic parents. And there's a bit of education on my mom's side of the family, so there's a fair amount of education there. There's not much education on my dad's side of the family. So some of you have heard this story before, but my dad grew up picking cotton in the Delta region of Arkansas. Think Mississippi, that's sort of what the Delta region looks like. My dad's 83 and my mom's 77. So don't tell mom I told how old she is. She's probably watching on live stream, so she's probably cringing right now. But my dad grew up in the Deep South picking cotton. I had an opportunity to go to college at a historically black college called Philander Smith College. Actually went to that college because they offered his twin brother a scholarship at the time. So some of you know that I have triplets. My dad's a twin, my grandmother's a twin, and so there you go. But literally, because my dad had a chance to go to college, he changed his trajectory and he changed his family's trajectory. Because you heard me say that I'm literally one generation removed from picking cotton. So I'm not a traditional academic. If you heard my background, I didn't sort of walk through the natural ranks of faculty member and then chair of a department and head of a center and dean and provost and on to the presidency. I come at this as a lawyer by training, but I come at this issue of higher education really as a public policy issue, as a public good, as a way for us to change and move society because of what happens on college campuses and the types of students we educate. And so I want you to know that about me because I believe that we do good in the world as institutions. And I believe the importance of our institutions serves society. And so whatever field you're in, you may not be in education, but you should be concerned about what's happening for colleges and universities because it's going to impact what's happening in your industry and what's happening in the world. So first, let me ask you a couple of questions. How many of you went to liberal arts colleges? Look at you. Good job. So let me ask you another question. You don't have to answer this question, but let me tell you how this question came to our Board of Trustees. So in March of last year, we began doing things at our board meeting called silent starts. For those of you who are on boards, you might want to try this. So here's what a silent start is. You ask a question, you pose a question for the board, and you wait 5 minutes before anyone can speak. Wait 5 minutes. And then the goal is not to answer the question. The goal is to write down all the questions that that question engenders. You got it? Right? So silent start, question, wait 5 minutes. Then the first thing you start to do is to say, what type of question did this raise for you? So it is 12:20, 12:40. Somewhere in the world, a child is being born. We at Oberlin want that child 18 years from now to choose Oberlin College, right? So the question before our board was, 18 years from now, what type of institution does Oberlin need to be for that child to choose Oberlin first? And the second part of that question was, what type of academic and student life experience needs to be happening at Oberlin for that child to choose Oberlin first? That was a question. 5 minutes of silence. People start writing. So the floor was open. We called on the first board member. And this was the first question that question raised for that board member. She said, 18 years from now, will small private colleges exist? That's a sobering question, right? And gives you a sense of the profound disruption that we're experiencing. If that was the first question that the board member brought up, okay, will we exist 18 years from now? That was the first question. So let's talk a little bit about the disruption so we can get into how we're trying to respond. So those of you who, we spend time looking at Moody's and Standard & Poor's and looking at their ratings, right? We have to do that at colleges. So you know that several years ago, they changed the outlook for a certain segment of colleges from stable to negative, right? So those were small, tuition-dependent, small endowment institutions that they said, boy, the outlook goes from stable to negative. And then a few years ago, they changed the outlook for the entire industry. So they literally said the whole industry, the outlook is negative. And that was driven a lot by demographics and enrollment issues. But that was sort of another moment of pause for higher education, and particularly for small private liberal arts colleges and places like Oberlin, who are very selective, highly endowed institutions, and yet they're questioning the whole outlook. So let's talk about demographics for a second. So I see my Cleveland State folks here, so you guys are going, yeah, I know. We've heard this before, right? We're living this. So demographics, the total number, the sort of size of the number of high school graduates graduating is declining. There's a declining number of high school graduates nationally. And it's been sort of stagnant for a while, and it's starting to decline. And if you look at the out years, by the time we get to 2027 or 2032, they're suggesting that the decline will be so steep that it'll be lower than 2013 levels, right? So if you are an institution that totally focuses on traditional age college students, that is all you got going on, it's gonna be pretty tough sledding if there's a declining number of students that are available to us. And that's certainly true depending on what state you're in, because if you are in a national institution or an international institution the way that Oberlin is, and you're recruiting from all sorts of states, there are some states where the decline is deeper than the national average. So I just left Pennsylvania a year ago, and the average there was 10% deeper decline than the national average. So if you were in Pennsylvania and only dependent on Pennsylvania students, wow, it's going to be tough for you. So we're certainly dealing with that issue. The only really increasing student body in the undergraduate realm are Latinx students. So if you're an institution that hasn't been focusing on what diversity looks like, what it means to have a diverse student body, if you only have really white students on your campus and very small diversity numbers, it's going to be more and more complicated for you to recruit students. So that's a huge industry disruption. So let me just say something to the folks who are listening who are the selective institutions, because this was a sobering data point for our board. So if the total number of high school graduates that graduate are about 3.8 million, it goes between 3.4 and 3.8. Of those 3.8 or so million, 2.6 of them decide to go to any college, right? So just they go to college. 1.7 of them decide to attend four-year institutions. Then when you ask them about whether they're going to private institutions and you look at that data point, that 3.8 of the graduates gets down to 560,000 that go to private institutions. If you need them to have an SAT score of 1350 or above, then that number gets to about 89,000 nationally. And if you need them to have a parental income of $150,000 or above, then it's about 20,000 students that we're competing for. That Worcester and Kenyon and just name all the small privates you want. That's what it looks like. That's a disruption, right? The growing market is adults, 25 to 30 years old, they are peaking in 2030 just as we're sort of bottoming out, okay? So, next big disruption, people questioning the value of a liberal arts college. This is so painful for those of us at liberal arts colleges because we know that it's been a powerful engine. Look at all of you who raised, almost everybody in this room raised their hand as a person who had attended a liberal arts college. So you know the power of this work that we do. And you know what it's meant for your own development in your career. I'm sure you will talk about your experience as transformative. And yet, you heard the Pew Research study said in late July that 61% of Americans say that the system of higher education is going in the wrong direction. On the right and wrong track numbers, those of you who are looking at politics right now, they're saying we're on the wrong track. Their perspective is. When you ask them about their perceptions of the value of a college degree and the quality of a college degree, that perception has declined over the past 2 years. When you ask them about their views of the liberal arts, only 48% have a favorable view of the liberal arts. They have stronger views around STEM and business. And when you ask them, I'll be interested to know what your answer to this question is. When you ask them to measure our success, it came down to one word. Can anybody guess what that one word is? Jobs. Look at you all. You know what you're talking about. Jobs, right? When you ask them about student debt, they have a perception that the amount of debt that students take out to go to college is significantly higher than it is. So they have the perception that it's about $90,000, right, over the course of their time. But the actual average debt is about $32,000. So there's this perception that the debt is way larger than it really is. And at a place like Oberlin, because we meet full need, the average debt is $27,000. Not insignificant, not suggesting that that's no money, but just compared to perceptions, right, it's out of whack. Here's the next big disruption. So we talk about debt, but we can't ignore our costs. So people are talking about our costs and they're concerned about it. And we're concerned about it too. And one of the reasons why we're concerned about it is because if you look at tuition, room, and board at a lot of small colleges, it's now started to exceed median family income. So median family income in 2017 was $61,000. And tuition at Oberlin this year is $54,000. So if you start to add up room and board and other things, then people start to question our costs. And we can talk about the reasons why, and I'm happy to talk about that afterwards. Yes, we have a high-cost model. You remember it, right? Small class sizes, those deep connections with faculty members, those special programs and initiatives that help you think differently about your opportunities. All of those things add to the cost. And yet, this is my phrase, and you can question me on it if you disagree with me. But as we get more and more expensive, then more and more families all act like first-generation college student families. And what I mean by that is they start to have the trade-off discussions in their house. So I'm the oldest sibling. I have somebody coming behind me. Can we really afford this? Should you make a different choice so Sarah can go? Wait a minute, what does that mean for these special opportunities? I'm not quite sure we can do this. What does it mean for the other pieces we want to see at this college? Because the whole family is sacrificing now for this experience. And of course, this is making competition fierce between colleges, right? So no more just holding out your sign and saying, we are who we are. Even at a selective place like Oberlin, we have to make the case for ourselves, right? Because of this disruption. And then the final one we should talk about, because I think it's a debate in higher education, is just what people are expecting us to deliver and how they want us to deliver this experience, right? And so many, many years ago, there was this debate about online, and many of us have gone to that and done that well at our institutions. But one of the things I always look at is what experience are high school students having so it can demonstrate what they're expecting at college. So this is one that's interesting to me. The Evergreen Education Group, a consultancy group that looks at what's happening at high schools. Here's their data. 2.7 million high school students, you heard that number. They roughly took 4.5 million online courses. 4.5 million supplemental online courses, a lot of them doing the AP that way, right? All sorts of ways, not just students who are coming from different types of institutions where they might not have economic advantage in that region. So they're taking and having the experience in a very different way. And then the final one I would say to you besides that is just our business model, right? Those of you who are in higher education know we talk about this a lot, right? Kind of a difficult word for those of us in higher education. Business model? We don't talk about ourselves that way, right? And yet I oftentimes say to folks that, yes, I agree you don't want to talk about the business model, but we do need to make it work, right? Because we won't be here to have the conversation, right? So think about how we price ourselves. For those of you who can't quite understand the sticker price and all those things you see, well, remember, we have to find a way to deliver on another mission that we care about, access and opportunity. And so there's some students who come to Oberlin and pay the full price. There are some students who come to Oberlin and pay part of the price. And there are some students who come to Oberlin and don't pay at all. And we have to find a way to make that work so that the business model works, and yet we meet our goal of access and opportunity. So it is a significant disruptions. As I've said to people, no more placid waters, right? No more, but I like rapids, personally. You know, we just got to get the right oar and the right people, right, and enjoy ourselves as we go down this path together. The last thing I'll say about the disruption, just to make it stark for you, the thing that I want to make sure we don't do is that we don't miss the inflection point, right? Because that's what's happening when you're in a disruption. Don't miss the inflection point of the change that may be necessary for the institution. And I always think about this when I'm in the throes of, you know, the most difficult moments of these things. I sort of wonder to myself, you know, 15 years ago, you know somebody sitting around the table at the board of directors of Blockbuster? You know somebody must have mentioned streaming video, right? Somebody said something about it, I'm sure, right? But somehow they missed the inflection point. And I have 11-year-old triplets who don't know anything about Blockbuster, right? Because as far as they're concerned, it doesn't exist, right? So, storied institutions like Oberlin, almost 185 years old. And yet, disruptions change industries, totally upend things. And so one of the things we have to focus on is how do we make sure we don't miss the inflection point? And how do we not be so resistant to change that change is forced upon us as opposed to the opportunity to shape that change? Right, so here's what we're trying to do, and I know some of my colleagues will respond to this. So demographically, how are we trying to respond to the demographic challenge, right? Well, we're all trying to think about different types of students, right? So it maybe can't just be about traditional age college students, right? And so for us, it's maybe about 5-year graduate programs. We just hired 2 staff members that are basically solely focused on recruiting internationally, right? How can we think about different types of students? How can we respond effectively curricularly in our diversity numbers to the changing landscape? Because you have to be an institution that looks like the community in order for the people to choose it, right? And so we're spending a lot of time thinking about what that looks like. On this question of value, right? And I remember when I first came to Oberlin, you know, I started using the phrase that I've used a lot, sort of value proposition. And people were like, that is not an Oberlin word. President Ambar, you gotta switch that up. That's not how we talk about things here. But what's interesting is that I've now been in higher education for 20 years. I go to almost every admissions event because I just think it's important for the president to be there. 20 years ago, families asked you some very interesting questions. Do you know what they ask me now? Literally using these words. So what's the return on investment for this experience, right? People never asked that 20 years ago, right? They ask about the curriculum and special opportunities and what the liberal arts provides in this broad way. They never asked that. Now they're asking me return on investment, right? So here's one of the things we did differently that we didn't do a year ago. We started talking about all the ways that the experience ties into your major. So we started talking about the words Oberlin Rise. So RISE stands for undergraduate research, for internships, for study abroad, for experiential learning, right? Because we're trying to tap into what the public is saying they want us to do, right? It's not that we're trying to change public perceptions, because we don't have a $50 million campaign to do that. But we can demonstrate to the public how what we do is what they want, right? And so it's talking about all these ways that the experience at Oberlin can prepare them for their life after Oberlin and start to talk about internships and study abroad and experiential learning, right? We started talking about connected learning because the families are with us in terms of the broad experience of the liberal arts. They really are. But they want us to talk about students' life after Oberlin. And they want us to connect it to what's happening in their classroom. And so they say, yes, 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 we want to hear about the major. Yes, we want to know about what's happening in the conservatory. But show us how it's all connected. Show us the coherence. And so for us, we've started to talk about, yes, here's your first year seminar. Here's how that gets connected to your winter term project. Here's how that's connected to your internship, to your study abroad experience, to your capstone experience. Because we want that experience to be connected in ways that helps you think about your life after Oberlin. So why do we do Connect Cleveland? Why do we do Connect Cleveland? Why are you spending time bringing all the students here? Well, we did that because we want them to already start thinking about internship opportunities, about all the dynamic work that they want to do on these special topics around undocumented folks, or they want to work on healthcare issues, or they want to work on science issues. It's all right here in Cleveland. And you can get that hands-on applied experience right here. So the phrase I've been using is, Oberlin is the think tank, Cleveland is the laboratory, right? We can go and connect them to all of the things that they're interested in right here in this dynamic city, right? Why do we start launching career communities, right? So some places, you know, liberal arts colleges, careers, why are you already talking about that? Well, just go right up to Dartmouth, just investing $20 million in career development, right? Because this is what people are saying they want to see from this liberal arts college experience. So here are our new career communities. The first one is nonprofits, education, and social impact. The second one may seem un-Oberlin, business, finance, consultancy. That's the second one we're doing. Arts and creative is one. Health professions, right? Connecting people already to those types of things. Here's the next big thing we're thinking about. Our cost, right? So over the past couple of years, the truth of the matter is at Oberlin, we have been not having as large tuition increases as we had in the past. Trying to respond to this cost thing. Here's a small thing that may seem insignificant, but it matters to families. Because each one of these little things we add on books and travel back to your family and all those things can make it seem like this experience is not, you can't afford it. So a simple thing that students were the most happy about, free laundry. Just no more quarters, everybody, right? But it's the small things that address cost that makes a difference, right? New academic programs, right? So what does it mean to have, you know, an MFA in creative writing? So Oberlin is very much known for creative writing program. What might it mean to have a 5-year MFA program? What might it mean to also do a portion of it low residency? Trying to think about it in different types of students. What does it mean to collaborate with other institutions, right? Things that in the past may seem like we're all standing on our own, and yet we're all seeing that this collaboration is totally necessary. Because the disruption is real, but the opportunities are real as well. So the last thing I'll say to you. So the truth of the matter is that we can't just narrow down the liberal arts college experience to careers or to cost or to all of these things, even though that's what the public says they want. What we also have to demonstrate is the other part of what the liberal arts provides. And for us, we think our worth is measured, yes, in the things that the public says they care about, but it's also measured in meaningful lives well lived. And that's the thing that we think liberal arts colleges provide that sometimes may be missing, right? So I'm actually pretty optimistic despite the challenge. Because if you look at what's happened to people who went on after their liberal arts college career, they literally are out there changing the world for good. Literally changing the world for good. And we feel that's particularly true at Oberlin. So some of you know that Oberlin has this social justice underpinning. You know, you heard our roots. Those are deep roots, right? We believe in changing society. And sometimes social justice has been politicized and made partisan, right? Just even the name, frankly. Sometimes people don't want to say that. Somehow that's partisan. But from our perspective, it's not partisan to care about your fellow human beings. And it's not partisan to want equal opportunity, not advantage, but equal opportunity for everyone to have their talents on full display. It's not partisan to want a fair justice system. It's not political to want the environment to last us for years and years and years to come, right? And we believe that because we can both provide the sort of basics that families say they want, but also with this underpinning of changing the world for good, that liberal arts colleges are more relevant today than they've ever been. They're more relevant today than they've ever been. And that all we have to do as institutions to respond to this disruption is to apply the very skills that we say we provide for students, right? To apply critical thinking, right? To apply interdisciplinary thinking, to apply research, to apply all those things that we say we provide to students, and that we prepare them for this adaptive ability that they have to be prepared for. That all we have to do is to do the same thing. And if we will do that, if we are willing to apply our own liberal arts college skill set to the challenges that we face, then I guarantee you that your institutions, all the ones that you raised your hands about, right? And our institution will be here for years and years to come doing good in the world. Thank you so much.
All right. Today we're listening to a forum with Carmen Twillie Ambar, the 15th president of Oberlin College. We're about to begin the audience Q&A, and we welcome questions from everyone. City Club members, guests, students, or those of you who are joining us via our live stream. If you'd like to tweet a question, please tweet it at the City Club, all one word, @ the City Club, and our staff will try and work it into the program. Holding the microphones today are Marketing and Outreach Coordinator Julia Wong and Content Coordinator Bliss Davis. May we have the first question, please?
Thank you, Dr. Ambar. Division I, large public universities with football programs get so much attention in the media that it becomes very difficult for liberal arts colleges, particularly small ones with Division III programs, to get the same level of attention with teenagers. How do you battle that? How do you confront that?
Right. So it's interesting, we've been talking about the same challenge even for a place like Oberlin that has this sort of large name recognition. So how do you break through, right? And in some ways, I think the truth of the matter is it's going to be different for each individual institution. What I've experienced over my 20 years is that the solutions for institutions are not formulaic. Like we just can't pull out a formula and say, do these 7 things and it'll all be okay. what you have to do is you have to figure out what's right for your institution. So what does breakthrough look like? Well, some of it looks like the different strategies for admissions, right? What does it mean to have different relationships with high schools and colleges? So one of the things that we discovered recently is that majority of Oberlin students are recommended by a friend or someone, a trusted advisor, right? So that's a different strategy than if people are seeing you in the newspaper, right? So one of the breakthroughs, I think, is figuring out how your institution, how people learn about you, how they know about you, what are the linkages that you can make with the right high school counselors, with the right regional folks that can help you break through in that message. And then there are some things that colleges are doing together. So CIC is trying to have a stronger Twitter presence, a stronger presence in social media to try to talk about the liberal arts broadly. But I do think this is an individual choice for each institution about how you break through the noise, how you break the noise with your competitors, right, and how you break through in your region. And it depends on where you are. So for us, we're spending a lot of time thinking about, how can our board be stronger thought leaders, right? So AGB just has this new Guardian initiative talking about board members being more actively talking about the liberal arts. How can we use all of our individual players on our campus to be that vocal voice that helps us break through? Because it is hard. It is hard. But I do think that there is a group of people who are very much still interested in liberal arts college. We have to do well with that group, and then we have to expand it. We have to get those people who may not be thinking about liberal arts colleges. And that's where I think the sort of uniqueness comes in for each institutional choice about how do you break through the noise. And it's about media strategies, it's about using your alumni, right? It's about all the things that you can do to elevate particular programs. It's about the research of what it means that programs that people really know you for. Are there ways to talk about that in different ways that attract more students? And I think, frankly, for all of us, it's like all of those strategies. Like, it's not one, it's like 7 or 8 strategies all together to try to break through.
To follow up on the last question, what are you doing to specifically attract international students?
Right. So I'm going to Asia in 7 days. I really am. That's not the only thing we're doing, but I'm heading off to Hong Kong and Tokyo and Seoul. So a couple of things. The first is I talked about adding some staff members that are specifically recruiting international students and doing what those staff members do, going to regions all over the world. I am working with high school counselors and other folks to help think about international students. Certainly we're trying to use my own voice and work with our alumni all over the world to have admissions events and all of those things. But the other thing I will say about attracting international students, we're in a tough climate. We don't have to make political comments here to just, the climate is tough for international recruitment given what's going on nationally. I'll just leave it at that. But it's still true that the work that you have to do to go to different countries and to talk about your institutions with the right people is a part of that work. But the other thing I would say for our campuses is, what does it mean to internationalize your campus? And that means that the campus has to be a place that's welcoming when students get there. So what does it mean to have the infrastructure for students for whom their native language might not be English? What does it mean to have support systems for immigration and all the other pieces that need to be there for international students? What does it mean to have an internationalized curriculum that's supportive of diverse perspective and viewpoints? So all of those pieces are pieces that are happening at Oberlin that make the campus be a welcoming campus. And then you have to go out and do the work that was required to recruit students. And for us, we happen to have this really dynamic collection of a conservatory and arts and sciences. And so in some ways, we have an advantage there because of the different types of students that might choose Oberlin because of both of those divisions.
In a world where student debt is continuously on the rise, can Oberlin College, and jobs are becoming increasingly more competitive in America, can Oberlin College, being the 14th most expensive college in the United States, survive?
Yeah. Well, I think that, for Oberlin, we meet full need. And so our goal is, we're not making admissions decisions based on your ability to pay. We're making admissions decisions before that, and then we're agreeing to meet students' full need. So one of the things I say at every admissions event is that We want you to be able to afford this experience. And so that's why we have this whole cadre of financial officers that really work hard to help families afford what it means to choose Oberlin. But I think that all colleges are having to face what this increasing cost looks like. And what might that mean? You know, so I think about my own children. They're 11 years old. Tuition is $50,000 at a lot of institutions. What's tuition going to look like for the triplets, right? I know. It's a tough one. But I think that the way institutions respond to this increasing cost is about how we manage access and opportunity and how we manage helping students who have the least advantage financially afford our institutions. And so at places like Oberlin, that really means meeting full need. And that means that, you know, everyone has a sort of national standard of what people say parents can afford to pay. And we all have that same sort of data, right? And then Oberlin meets full need. And so for us, I think we are in the financial advantage of being able to say that. But not every institution has that opportunity. And so I do think that people are going to have to make some difficult choices, both the institutions and families themselves, about this experience. And the question is, can we find ways to reduce our expenditures at institutions so it's not so costly? So we're in the process of thinking about all sorts of things at Oberlin, but we're in this massive review of the entire institution, trying to make some decisions about, can we reduce our expenditures? Can we find ways to provide this experience at not at the same sort of high cost that we always have? Because this is important to us from the standpoint of an institution that's always been about access and opportunity.
I have 2 granddaughters and 2 grandsons, all of whom are either starting or about to start college.
Right.
I'm going to try and ask this question in a neutral manner.
Okay.
In the days of the Kavanaugh hearings, the Me Too movement, the Duke lacrosse team, the repeated stories we hear of how sex charges are handled at colleges. Mm-hmm. I'll try and make it easy for you. What can you tell me that would give me assurance that if any of my grandchildren went to Oberlin, they would be safe and treated fairly?
Okay. Well, you know, I think that the truth of the matter is that what's been happening on college campuses around the Me Too movement, sexual misconduct, and all of those sort of umbrella issues has actually been pretty extraordinary in terms of the responsiveness that I think colleges have had to these issues. And sometimes the headlines don't demonstrate that, but just my experience in working with other college presidents and what's happening on college campuses. The balance that I think college campuses tried to have with the complainant and the respondent, if you want to put it in a judicial, kind of quasi-judicial framework, has actually been one of a fair amount of restraint in what I would call educational development. So one of the challenges for us is that the sort of outside regulators want us to operate like court systems and to want us to operate in a judicial framework. And that's really not what we're positioned to do. That's really not our work. What we do is we educate students. That's what we do well. And so what we've tried to do is to try to balance this work in profound ways. So at Oberlin, you know, we have a very strong Title IX coordinator, which is the person who handles these types of complaints. We have a system that has both peers and students involved in the discussion as people are having these debates about what happened in a particular incident. And our goal is to try to treat each student with respect and fairness to the process. And I think that we've done that fairly well. And I think that that happens for students through this process. In terms of safety, you know, all of our institutions, you know, we report our safety data out. You can sort of see that very clearly about what has happened on our campus and what things haven't gone as well as we wanted to do. And in fact, in a place like Oberlin, you know, the crime on our campus is very low. It's almost negligible compared to a lot of campuses because it is a very safe campus. So if you were asking me about your kids coming to Oberlin, I would confidently say to you that it's a very safe campus, that it's a campus that supports student development, And then when issues happen with students, our goal is to try to do it from an educational standpoint and to send them through the educational process in a way that's fair and equitable to all the students. And I think that one of the challenges that's happened over the course of these issues coming out is that sometimes the regulators, I'll put them in quotes, are asking colleges to do things that they are not equipped to do. We're not equipped to be a court system. We're not equipped to have judges. That's not how institutions operate. What we're equipped to do is to educate students. And that's what the process around sexual misconduct looks like on college campuses. And I would think that that's what you would want us to do.
Next question comes from Twitter. How is Oberlin College handling free speech, safe spaces, and related issues?
I knew this was going to come up. So it's interesting. This has just become the bane of every college president's existence, right? Besides the financial model, what's going on with free speech? And I'll just say to the Twitter questioner that on some level, I think college campuses get a bad rap here when people talk about, they criticize us for snowflake students and our inability to handle difficult speakers and our inability to deal with people who have different perspectives. And I say, have you looked at society? Have you looked at Congress? So this notion that we should be being held to some standard that society is not being held at, I push back a little bit on it. But here's what's happening at Oberlin. So we have taken sort of an interesting approach to this, I think. So we started this new project my first year called Sustained Dialogue. And one of the things I said when I first got to campus is that we can't be a place that celebrates difference, but only the difference we agree with. That we were doing a disservice to students by suggesting that you can't be in the room with people with whom you disagree, that you can't have discussions with people with whom you disagree, and that we're actually not preparing you for the society that you're going to inherit and for the work that we want you to go out and do in the world. So here's what the Sustained Dialogue Project looks like. It's a group of about 15 students that meet over about 8 weeks. They take a difficult topic where there's a lot of disagreement, and they agree to discuss that topic with one premise. The premise is to listen with the purpose of understanding, not with the purpose of changing the other individual, right? You just take a different perspective. It's interesting to me that this has come out of our Office of Religious Life. And the reason why I think that's interesting is because I think when you sit down with someone of another faith practice, you typically don't sit down with them in order to try to convert them to your faith practice. You typically sit down with them in order to understand their faith practice, to get a better sense of what their perspective is, but not to try to change them, right? And so our goal is to scale this up so that 25% of our students every year participate in Sustained Dialogue. I will tell you that the students have experienced those sessions, have said it's changed how they engage with their colleagues. It's changed the way that they move in the world, because it's trying to think about different perspectives and different viewpoints without trying to change the other person or shut the other person down, but trying to listen to their perspective and understand their perspective, even if you may disagree with it. And so at Oberlin, we think that we are absolutely the right place to do it, because sometimes people can perceive us as a place that's not like that, that's not willing to listen to other perspectives. They can view us as more narrow than we really are. But Oberlin has been a leader for its entire history. We oftentimes say it's going to start at Oberlin, but it's going to show up at your campus in a couple of years, right? Because that's who we are, right? And so I think this move that we've made to start to talk about free speech in a way that says we're going to listen with the purpose of understanding, I think is the next wave of what's happening on college campuses. And I believe that what's going to happen in Oberlin and across college campuses is we're going to show the rest of society how to do it. Because we're the microcosm of a lot of different people getting together who have different perspectives. And we're going to demonstrate what it means to listen to someone with whom you may have radically different viewpoints, but that it's worth listening to their perspective.
Hello, yes. First, I want to thank you for gracing us with your presence and your passion. One thing I wanted to mention is the disruption you mentioned about high school students and how they're diminishing and how there are not as many graduating, and the number that you're competing with is very low. What type of programs are in place or will be in place to maybe partner up with like local high schools and that kind of thing to get to students before they get to those years where it gets very difficult for them to continue.
Right.
And try to get them to that next level.
Right. So it's interesting at Oberlin, so we have a fair number of summer programs and opportunities for students to come on our campus and get engaged. And the question is, how do you do that at the right places in the right ways that really attract the students that you want? And I think that's the next step for us. So what are the right types of summer programs and opportunities that connect students? You know, I think that we're always trying to find the right personal linkages. And so if you have one for us, I would be open to that. Because at the end of the day, what you really have to find is that right advocate in that high school, in that special program that knows Oberlin, that had a few students that have come and had a good experience, and you can send us the right students. So, you know, at every institution, I say this to parents all the time, that they come to Oberlin and it may or may not be the fit for them, right? And that's okay, because this is a choice that's, yes, about the academic program and costs and all those other things, and then it's about fit. Is this the right place for you? And so some of the work we can do is to try to find the right individuals at the right institutions that understand Oberlin and can help us bring the right students to us. So I think we have the nice set of summer programs that do that for us, but we're always open to new opportunities and new connections that you may provide for us that help us help particular students see Oberlin as the right choice for them.
Hi, President Ambar. I'm actually an Oberlin community member.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I have found to be really surprising, I moved to Oberlin 3 years ago, was the rift, the town and gown rift.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if you can speak to how you're applying the values that you say Oberlin College represents to the relationships between Oberlin, the town, and Oberlin, the college.
Right. So let me just put a little spin on it since I'm new to the community, because I know sometimes people describe it as a rift. And yet every college campus that I've ever been on is having debates and discussions with their town. So it may feel like a rift in Oberlin, but just as an experience, that type of push and pull, the town-gown relationships happens everywhere. So I don't think we should feel so bad that there are always these tensions. They're natural tensions, right? That we have to survive together, right? Oberlin College doesn't exist without the town and vice versa, and yet we have different interests sometimes. But it's certainly true that there's sometimes particular issues that come up that create tensions. So one of the things that we started this year was our Be a Good Neighbor strategy. And so the first thing we did on that topic was to have a workshop for all of our first-year students. And we brought in people from the town to talk to our students about what it means to be in a small town and be a good citizen. Because we have students from all over the country. They sometimes come from huge places, small places, and they don't necessarily know what it means to be in a small town and what it means to be representing the institution sort of unknowingly, right? When you're down in the shops or when you're at the local restaurant. And that was a really great session. It was an opportunity for the business folks in the town to talk about what they needed from students, and for also students to put that conscious hat on, because I just think you don't necessarily know that when you're downtown and there's the 3 or 4 students walking down, that this is businesses and school children and other folks who view as a collective, right, the Oberlin students, right? So that's the first session that we did. The second thing we did, which I hope the folks in the town appreciated, is we had a Shop Downtown Day. And so we gave students special incentives to go and shop downtown and to go and be active members of an economic community, right? That we all are connected economically. And for students to see, sometimes I think when you don't see the business as a small business trying to make their way in the world in a complicated environment, they can seem like the big conglomerate that you can kind of otherize almost. And knowing that there's a family, oftentimes, that is running that business, that they are trying to support both the town and what's happening in their personal lives, kind of personalize it for students. I hope we can do something similar at commencement for families. And then I think the next steps for us are to think about some joint projects that we can do together. Oberlin, the city, is important to us. We are under no illusions that somehow we can exist without Oberlin, the city. And I also believe, though, that Oberlin, the college, is central to Oberlin, the city. And as long as we view ourselves as inextricably intertwined with each other, then I know we'll find our way together. Appreciate it.
Today at the City Club, we're listening to a forum with Carmen Twillie Ambar, the 15th president of Oberlin College. Today's forum is part of our Local Heroes series, sponsored by Citizens Bank and Dominion Energy. Brittany O'Connor from Citizens Bank and Tracy Oliver from Dominion Energy are joining us today, and thank you for your support. Today's forum is also the Mandel Endowed Forum on Higher Education, made possible by a generous gift from the Jack, Joseph, and Morton Mandel Foundation. We're delighted to have Joanne White and guests from the Mandel Foundation with us today. We appreciate your continued support for City Club programming. Additionally, we welcome guests at tables hosted by Cleveland State University, Cuyahoga Community College, IPM, John Carroll University, and Oberlin College. Lastly, we welcome students from Flow Homeschool Co-op. Student participation in City Club forums is provided by many foundations, including the William N. Weiss Foundation, and we thank all of you for being here today. And that brings us to the end of today's forum. Thank you, Ms. Twillie Ambar. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here today. This forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Robert Conrad, Cleveland State University, the Chautauqua Institution, the Cleveland Clinic, and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland Incorporated.